Jack is someone who doesn't need an introduction, and I won't give him one. But let me say a couple opening words and tell you how we're going to proceed today. We reached out to Jack after he published the book and did the 60 Minutes interview because we thought this was someone who was obviously can speak from inside the lobbying and influence industry like no one else, and who's putting forward a series of interesting reform proposals and brings a unique perspective to the reform community. So we're interested in hearing from him today about a whole range of things. I think there's at least three particular areas that are especially interesting. One is how the offers of gifts and travel have enormous influence on legislators, including apparently huge returns for very small trinkets. It's kind of an interesting cultural phenomena. The second area of interest is the importance of the revolving door phenomenon. And I think from talking to Jack and reading the book and seeing some of the interviews, there's some components to that that maybe aren't so immediately obvious in terms of the logistics of how the revolving door phenomenon plays out. And we'll be interested to hear about that. And a third thing is the nexus of lobbying and campaign spending and how they reinforce each other. Jack has a history that we're all familiar with, and conversation today is no holds barred. Doesn't come here expecting to be protected from anything, but we will be sure to treat him respectfully, as tough as the questioning gets. So the way forward will be he'll speak for 20 minutes or so. I'll do a round of questions. We'll give a round of questions to folks from the media who are sitting on the floor and blocking everybody else's view. And then we'll try to push them out of the way and see if I can see you guys back there. We'll get some questions from the floor as well. We have enough time to do all that and do it well. And I'll stop talking and turn the floor over to Jack Abramoff.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for all coming. Sorry about those who don't have a sight line. Hopefully we can move around a little bit and get to see each other a little bit better. Somebody had told me a number of years ago that I'd be sitting in this room, in this building, talking to all of you, looking at all of them, and not have cuffs on or something like that. I would probably not have believed them, but my life has been an interesting journey from where I was until where I am today. And I hope it will continue to where I want to go, which is to continue down the path I'm currently on. I, as you know, was a lobbyist, although I guess today as lobbyist is maybe an unsure term. People who are lobbyists don't call themselves lobbyists. They're history professors and strategic advisors. Maybe I wasn't a lobbyist, I don't know, but I used to call myself a lobbyist, and certainly most of you have called me a lobbyist, and I was indeed engaged in that business. I was involved in an area at the end of it that I come to look back and wish I maybe was never involved in. I did things that I wish I had never done. Unfortunately, I stepped over lines that even most lobbyists don't step over. They don't need to step over because the lines are drawn in a way that are very comfortable for them. And as a consequence, and rightfully so, I fell into the abyss and fairly severely punished as far as I'm concerned, and went through a process that didn't start when I entered prison. It started really at the very beginning of my tale, which was late February 2004. And in that process, I went through a metamorphosis. And I first started when confronted with the public assault. It was in the usual stages of denial, and frankly, even before I got to denial, it was in the stage of that this won't last long, and just a mere pebble on the road, and then denial, and then questioning why me versus everyone else. And only later was I able to start examining in a serious way what I was involved in, what I did in the world I inhabited. And that was a painful process, and it's a process I hope most people don't have to go through, though there are many good things about that process. and many good things that have happened as a consequence. Many bad things, many very difficult things, including a 43-month stay in a federal prison, and very great damage to my family, who I love very much. But I don't view at any point, and I don't think I did view, that it is anything but I who brought myself to where I went. Having said that, in the run-up to having to go to prison, I don't know if this is still on, or can you hear me? Okay. In the run-up to having to go to prison, I started to read through the 850,000 emails that I sent while I was a lobbyist. Unfortunately for me, I was a prolific writer on email, and fortunately for the committees and journalists who examined me, the law firms kept every email, and they were available in their great volume. But as I started reviewing them, I started looking at my world a little bit differently. And doing so, I came to realign what should have been ruling philosophical beliefs with what my world outlook was in terms of the world I was in, the lobbying world. And came to some conclusions, some of which are harsh, some of which are not met with great glee in this town, and some of which are met with great attack by folks in this town. The essence of which is that I was involved deeply in a system of bribery, legalized bribery for the most part, illegal bribery, unfortunately for me, somewhat, and that system, which I took advantage of, but I also took for granted, as do many who are still in it, still to a large part exists today. And so as I went through the thought processes, including now by entering prison, which is a dreadful place, and a place of great solitude, and not necessarily fear every day, but certainly loneliness, where one is able to, at times, when the noise and the din quiet, think about what you are and where you came from and what you should have been. And as I thought about those things, I came to a number of conclusions, including that my experience in that world, my knowledge of that world, could either be something that was an interesting footnote to me as I moved on beyond that world, because I knew eventually I would get out and try to restart my life with my family. And frankly, there was nothing more than I wanted than to go crawl into a hole and to not be reading about myself in the paper, not be seeing my name out there on the internet, and just go away and hopefully be forgotten as quickly as possible. Or I could take what I knew and I could think about how could I be helpful? How could I make some recompense? How could I use my experience, my knowledge, and try to help those who, frankly, I disdained and those who I couldn't stand, including those in this building, and the other groups that attacked me, which I understand was only business, not personal, at the time. May have been personal. Mikey, somebody added on, right? And I could reach out to them, and I could find a way when I got out to maybe help create some reform that's meaningful and serious, as these groups have been trying to do and are doing for years. And then instead of battling them, as I did as a lobbyist, when I paid attention to them, to be honest with you, most lobbyists operate in a world where they think everything is fine, they're in their own cocoon, and they're not really, it's not necessary for them to pay attention to these things. They'll just get around them when the time comes. So instead of that, I could put whatever experience, knowledge, creativity I had to work and to try to do something. So I wrote a book where I tried to talk about my life as I saw it, as it unfolded, and to offer some solutions that were really the consequence of my solitary thinking. Some of the solutions probably have some merit. Some of them need some thinking through. I don't have all the answers to any of these problems. I'm not sure anyone does. We're dealing with human beings. We're dealing with human beings who are motivated to, in many cases, make a lot of money or accumulate a lot of power. And whether they think they're doing good or not doing good, they're very clever. So any solution, there is usually a workaround. So it's an ongoing battle. But I figured, let me throw some ideas out that I would have opposed as a lobbyist, things I would have worried about, things I felt would have affected how I dealt. And when my book came out, as it did in November, I would start speaking about these things. And if it was something of interest, great, and if it wasn't, fine. But I felt that just as one way of making recompense, which I have many others that I'm doing and need to do, obviously, that would be important. So ergo, I wound up eventually coming over and meeting here, which is particularly ironic since Ralph Nader founded this organization, and my entire political career was in some way or other opposed to Ralph Nader and his various achievements. So I found it quite interesting that I wound up here. I also have now joined as a senior fellow with United Republic, which is an organization similarly dedicated to reform and finding a way to combine the elements on the right and the left and in the middle into one force that can get something done. And so that is where I'm holding at this point. I'm not necessarily here to give you ideas that you haven't thought about, or ideas that are necessarily going to ultimately play out and to be practical, but merely where I'm at in the thinking process. And I think about these things all the time, and I've thought about them all the time over the course of what's now been, at the end of this month, 8 years since I was last a lobbyist. So with that, I thank you for having me, and would love to entertain questions.
Well, why don't you outline what the core elements are of your reform proposals?
Right. So I believe there are a lot of things that need to be reformed, but I think there are 4 areas, I hope there are 4 areas where the right and the left can agree. Because ultimately, I'm still a conservative. I'm not, my philosophy and political views haven't changed in their entirety. I have, on the margin in some areas, altered my views. But one thing that is certainly the case, that there's not going to be anything done in this country unless the right and the left can agree. And so the question becomes, how can the right, what issues and where can the right and the left agree? So looking at it from a conservative point of view, the elements in my book that I've drawn out are basically 4. One, that no lobbyist or someone gaining something from the federal government that the rest of us don't have, basically no special interest, can give any money politically, period, not a dollar. Nor can they provide any gratuity, indirectly, directly, or be involved in the provision of any gratuity. Ultimately, that gets to the bribery issue. Someone who's getting something back from the government, whatever form their organization is, however they are individually, in choosing to get some, not somebody on Social Security or somebody on welfare or something like that, but somebody who's getting something that is not a generally available program. And this is, I understand as I'm saying it, is very tough to define, and finding a way to refine all these things will not be easy. But those individuals and the lobbyists and strategic advisors and history professors and others shouldn't be allowed to give any money politically or any gratuity. Number 2, that the revolving door between public service and cashing in the influence industry. And I just say as a footnote that the term lobbyist needs redefining, obviously. It's come to the fore more in the discussion in terms of Newt Gingrich's activities post-congressional service. But it's there not just with Newt, it's there on both sides of the aisle. It's there for members and staff, primarily members who leave. The definition of lobbyist in the law probably needs to be looked at. But for the sake of this discussion, I believe that those who engage in public service, those who work on Capitol Hill, those who are elected to federal office, those in the administration, shouldn't be able to move from those positions into the influence industry in a way that, I'm talking not necessarily to the influence industry as the public good, groups that are working on general philosophical, general issues, but I'm talking about lobbyists, however they're defined. And number three, and something that was addressed in the Stock Act and has been addressed from time to time, but needs to be perhaps tightened up because of the fact that we needed a Stock Act, is that any lawmaker, any congressman, all Congress should have all the laws they make apply to them if they apply them to us. And then finally, and this is one that there isn't general agreement on the right or the left, but it's one that I've come to believe personally, and that's that there need to be term limits. I was against that as a lobbyist. Frankly, I was against it because once you buy a congressional office, you don't want to have to repurchase that office a few years down the line, to speak bluntly. But I believe that over time, with the exception of some very few incredible saints, most people start slipping into a corrupt, they fall into the miasma. And I believe that getting people in and out of here, therefore, is probably not a bad idea. I'm also in favor, by the way, of term limits for staff. But that would be more controversial. Anyway, the essence of it being that there are plenty of great citizens in this country who want to come serve. They should have the opportunity. It shouldn't be the undertaker that removes a nonagenarian senator from their perch, unless they, of course, were elected as an octogenarian, perhaps. But it should be something that is revolving. So those are the four basic components.
Let me ask you about the revolving door for a minute. In your practice as a lobbyist, how did you work that game? What did revolving door do for you?
Well, I mainly hired staff. I didn't hire members. I thought members were generally lazy and self-entitled and wouldn't do the hard work that I demanded of the people who worked for me. I did hire one member at the behest of leadership who was a very nice person but proved my point by being, when he was sober, he proved not to be as effective as the others. So, and that's not to say that there are no members who are effective. Lloyd Meads, who was a congressman from Seattle, was the senior member of our firm and was the most effective and hardest working person there. So there's certainly the exception. So I generally hired only staff. So what I found was at the beginning when I started building my practice, I needed people immediately. So I would go to the Hill, and 90% of the people we hired were Capitol Hill staff / members. And the reason, everybody I assume knows that, but what the reason is you want access, and these people have access. They have built-in access. They came from there. And so all their buddies up there are going to, and did, provide them continuing access. So a lobbyist who can't get in to the member's office and get to the decision maker is not a valuable lobbyist to the lobbying industry. So I would go up there at the beginning and hire members, or staff rather, and immediately, can you start next week? Well, eventually my staff got bigger, and as we were growing, we were planning our growth. And as we would plan our growth, I would see somebody who was the chief of staff in an office, and I thought, gosh, that person would really be great. She'd be an amazing lobbyist, or he'd be an amazing lobbyist. And I talked to them, when you're done here, I don't know when you're planning to leave, but when you're leaving, I'd like to hire you. And what I started to notice pretty quickly was the second I said that to them, either they said no, but they were so incredibly complimented that they, from then on, anything I asked was just absolutely granted, and they would go out of their way to return the compliment, as it were. And that almost was a bribe itself. Number two, they planned to go with me in a year and 6 months, but for that entire period of time, they really worked for me anyway, because now they were feather bedding. They were just creating, even subtly, some of them were careful not to do too much, but the truth is, virtually everybody started doing things that were now, I view, as inappropriate. They started doing things that, to benefit me and my clients. Some of them, frankly, were more effective than my staff that I was paying. They were sitting in there. They would call us up and say that, oh, there's a bill that we just found out about, and it's going to affect your tribal clients, and blah, blah, blah. And so ultimately, I never offered somebody a job that I didn't mean to give to them. I didn't offer somebody a job in the hope that I would just control them and not want to hire them. But it became apparent to me that that was an incredible way to control the congressional office, to offer the chief of staff a job and have them accept, ideally for a year or two out, and then just basically work with that office for the next year or two, building their subsequent practice in their minds. And I'm not the only one who came to any of these conclusions, obviously, and I'm not the only one, certainly, who hires from the Hill. I can't really claim any innovations in my lobbying practice. I wasn't a great genius. All I did was see things that I thought worked, and I overdid them, ultimately. But these things are going on today.
I think that's one of the interesting things in the book is the extent to which the things you did were exceptional and the things you did were standard. Well, on this point I thought one of the interesting things in the book about the revolving door was just this point you were making, that it wasn't just the general expectation of getting a job. It was the very specific expectation of getting a job, but not next week, sometime in the indefinite future.
Right.
And you think that's standard.
It's hard to give a percentage. It seemed 90% of the people I dealt with up there wanted to come work for me. I mean, that's what it certainly, by the way, that includes a healthy percentage who asked about coming to work for me, and including members. They see the lobbying world. They see there's so much money in it. They see the life of a lobbyist, at least in those days. I don't know. I mean, I haven't been a lobbyist for a while, but I imagine it's similar. Unlimited expense accounts, tickets to all the various sporting events, and we had the best tickets possible. As I've said, I think in the book, we were like Ticketron. We had the top tickets. Travel, private planes, golfing, vacations, whatnot. And a lot of them want to do that. They want to move from where they are into that. I don't think they show up like that. I don't think most people show up to Capitol Hill's members or staff thinking like that. And by the way, there are plenty of people out there who don't think like that, who don't have any desire to become a lobbyist. They want to stay there, or they want to go do something else. Or they want to go serve the public in a public interest group on the right or on the left. And that, to me, is all much more meritorious. But we can't ignore the fact that people up there are earning far less money than people in the lobbying industry. And as a consequence, they, like many human beings, look with some avarice toward making more money. And that is something that the lobbying industry uses. There's no question about it. I did. And again, I wasn't a great innovator.
Let's talk about the bribery side of the job. And starting with the illegal part, what did you do that was illegal in terms of giving gifts and benefits to members?
Well, one of the things I did was there was I presume there still is now, an exemption for governments in the gift ban, okay, where a governmental entity can give gifts whereas a private entity can't. I presume that's still exempt, right? That's still there. Okay. So there was a difference. I don't know if this still exists either, but in my day, I represented Indian tribal governments. And the Senate recognized tribal governments as governments for the purposes of the gift ban, and the House did not. The House did not recognize them. So we could lavish on any senator or Senate staffer anything we basically wanted, which we did, in terms of gifts as agents for our clients, whereas in the House we couldn't. Eventually, I basically just stopped paying attention to that line and gave gifts to the House guys too. At first we started out giving them invoices. If we give somebody a ticket to a football game, we'd give them an invoice for the tickets. Well, as you can imagine, not too many of those invoices were paid. A few of them were paid. We didn't exactly turn them over to a collection agency, I have to admit as well. It was sort of a running joke. Well, eventually we just stopped doing that. And so that was one area. Additionally, I had restaurants that I owned, and senators and congressmen and their staff would basically come in and feast away. That was, frankly, I have to admit, one of the reasons I started one of those restaurants, to have that dynamic take place. because I wanted as much as possible, as most lobbyists of that ilk, the ilk that I was, you want members of Congress and their staff on your playing field. You want them on your home turf, whether your home turf is a seat at the ball game, or a golf course, or a restaurant, or an airplane, or a vacation, or a trip, a congressional travel, and however it's called. And you want that dynamic. You want them away from their center of power onto your center of power, if you can create one. Because then, again, a lot of lobbying is basically psychology and negotiations. And so in trying to effect whatever change you want or whatever victory you're trying to achieve, you want all of those dynamics playing in your behalf. So that was what we did.
So you weren't giving people $50,000 in cash?
No.
You were giving them tickets to a Redskins game?
Yes.
How does that buy them?
Well, I'm glad you raised that like this. Every congressman will say, nobody's buying me for $2,000 contribution. No one's buying me for dinner. No one's buying my vote. That's besides the point. We didn't need to buy them. What you need to do as a lobbyist is not buy a vote. It's rare that somebody walks in and says, here's $50,000, vote my way. You don't need to do that. What lobbying is about, in large part, is becoming friends with them and becoming socially involved with them and spending time with them and winning them over that you're a good person, that you're their kind of folks and that kind of thing. You're helpful to them when they need to raise money for their political efforts, because Congress spends a lot of their time raising money. So in their mind, and I've had this explained to me, by the way, over time. I figured it out anyway, but Congressman would explain to me that you are enabling me to get back part of my day. By raising $50,000 for me, it's an hour I don't have to be on the phone. So I now get back my hour. So you're in essence giving them time back by doing the money. You're giving them pleasure, or you're giving them whatever relief from their tedium, or whatever they would view it, by bringing them to the ball game, or whatever you're doing. So it's not about, here's money, vote my way. It's about, and what I didn't plead guilty to that. I never did that. Even to me, that would have been too much. Okay, but instead, it's what I pled guilty to, and what I was guilty of, is a stream of goodies, okay, that led to an ability to ask them back for a stream of goodies the other way. And people say to me when I explain this, well, that's what lobbying is. And my response is, that's not what lobbying is. That's what bribery is, okay? Lobbying is a good thing. Lobbying, people accuse me of being against lobbying. I'm not against lobbying. Lobbying is a right in our Constitution to petition our government, either directly or indirectly. I'm not against that. And I'm not against most lobbyists. Most lobbyists were not like I was, by the way. What do they say? There's somewhere, depends on the figure, 15 to 30,000 lobbyists walking around town, whatever the number is. How many really? 100,000, as far as was registered. There aren't 15 to 100,000 Jack Abramoffs walking around. These are people who are good people trying to do their job by persuading people. The problem in lobbying is when the money gets involved, and that's what it is. But it's not bribery like we all see in the movies. It's a bribery that takes place over time.
Well, let's talk about the campaign money. What did you do with campaign money?
Well, I raised from my clients and from contacts every year millions of dollars for Republicans and Democrats.
I think you made an important point in a conversation we had. It wasn't what you actually yourself were contributing.
Right.
It really wasn't your money that was so important. It was the client.
Right. I gave the most amount one could give by law, which I don't remember what that amount was in those days, but I want to say 50 or 60,000, or I think it's higher now, 90,000 or something like that. Whatever the maximum one could give, I gave, and my wife gave. We didn't give any money in behalf of our children. We have 5 children, and even when they reached an age of majority, we wouldn't do that. We didn't feel that was right, unless it was their money. But we gave the most we could give. But it's rare, by the way, to have, I think we discussed, it's rare for a lobbyist to be giving that much money away. People, I think, who are not in the lobbying world don't know a lot of lobbyists, don't realize that most of them aren't interested in giving away their money. In fact, probably they would be most happy if a law was made, most of these folks, banning them from giving money so that they could go to the Congress and say, I give you everything, but I'm not allowed to give you anything. I think that would be actually to their delight. Actually, Grover Norquist did a study one year that I was a lobbyist as part of their K Street project. They took the list of registered lobbyists and they took the FEC reports and they did a cross check. And they found that I think it was less than a dozen lobbyists had given the maximum amount of money they could actually give. And that most of them were giving paltry sums for lobbyists, $1,000, $2,000, $5,000, something like that. Where my power came, though, was not from my money, because it was limited. It was from my ability to collect money and to bundle money and to get money from clients and others. And that's where the real money juice came from.
Now, you haven't, as you mentioned, you haven't abandoned your old politics. So in the area of campaign spending, you're not with us on public financing systems.
Right.
But you do have this idea that people who want something from the government shouldn't be able to make campaign expenditures.
Right.
Now, you're familiar, obviously, with the Citizens United decision. How does the idea that corporations are spending on campaigns intersect with how you're looking at the world?
Well, it complicates it terribly and makes it very difficult to do what I want to do. Because a guy was involved in the business world and had plenty of corporations that were set up to make sure nobody knew what they were doing. Oh, ultimately, everybody found out what they were doing, but they were set up in that way. And I guarantee you there are plenty of other corporations set up in the same way. I don't think a corporation is an evil entity any more than I think it's a good entity. I think it's just an entity. But it's a complicating entity, and it complicates matters. And so that part of the decision actually is very troubling. I'm not an expert on how to reverse that other than a constitutional amendment, but I do find that part of it difficult.
And then the underlying logic is that corporations are only making contributions indirectly because they're trying to influence government policy. So exactly for their own material benefits. So for exactly the reason you say that people or corporations shouldn't be able to make expenditures, that's all they're doing.
It seems. I'm certain somebody will come up with the exception, but it would probably only prove the rule.
The money going to the super PACs is not to the campaigns. How do you look at that, all these so-called independent expenditures?
Well, I mean, my own preference personally would be that people, this is my preference as a conservative / whatever elements of libertarian I have in me. I would prefer people give only to campaigns, and campaigns take responsibility for everything that they are doing. Not that they have these super PACs where, the former campaign communications advisor is now running this independent PAC that has nothing to do with the campaign, or their former chief of staff from their congressional office or whatever it is. I just find that to be hilarious as most Americans find it to be. And so instead of that, I'd rather, personally, that money be given directly to campaigns in whatever amounts, and discuss what that is, but that responsibility be taken so that if a message is put out in behalf of Newt Gingrich or Mitt Romney or Barack Obama or whoever it is, that it's their message, not some shadowy group that has, quote, nothing to do with them.
Let me ask you a last thing and we'll open it up. How, from the influence industry perspective, how do you think this independent expenditure stuff plays out? And of course, the premise, which is ridiculed by Stephen Colbert and others, is completely non-coordinated. But the premise of the Supreme Court decision in Citizens United was no quid pro quo, no perception of quid pro quo, no corrupting influence for an independent expenditure because by definition it's not coordinated. So if you're putting millions of dollars into a super PAC, either from a corporation or individual, what do you think you're getting out of that, if anything, or nothing?
Well, I think it depends. It depends. I think it's the same thing as if you're giving directly. There are people who give contributions directly who don't want anything back. They just want that candidate who they admire and they agree with their positions to win, or they want that party to win, or they want that philosophical movement to win. To me, that's meritorious. And then there are people who are giving in the hopes of that their kid who was kicked out of college will become an ambassador somewhere, or that they're going to get posting to some undersecretary position or something like that, or they're going to get a big loan for some energy company or something like that. And there are people who give like that. Those are people that I believe need to be removed from the system. If somebody wants to give because they believe that somebody is a great leader and they believe in the philosophies and things like that. I personally think that's fine. I think that's what's good about America. But the other stuff is the problem. And it's difficult to separate it. And I know that there are no easy solutions here, and there are 1,000 details to go through. But I don't know that it's my job necessarily to do that. I'm just trying to make some observations from 30,000 feet.
Okay, let's go with some media questions. My colleague Rich Robinson has a mic, and we can start here in the front.
Thank you for being here. I'm Carolina from Voice of America. My question now is in terms of, what about the congressmen? Looks like that the lobbyists are the bad guys here, but the congressmen, there is also corruption. So what do you think it needs to be done in terms of legislation, I don't know, to really stop that the congressman can become friends with the lobbyists, so there is an exchange, I don't know.
Well, I don't know that I do understand what you're saying. I don't know that we can put laws in that you can't become somebody's friend. All right, but it's one thing to be somebody's friend. It's another thing for that friend to buy you something. Another thing for that friend to be your money friend. I guess that the area of attack that I'm trying to get, because I remember as a lobbyist, I'm speaking to you based on my experience. Well, I had friends in the Congress. I had friends in the Congress that were friends of mine from way before. But I had new friends too, who frankly only became my friend because of my ability to give them money and be able to help them in some way. And so cutting that out, what I agree with you. The problem isn't necessarily, the lobbyists aren't completely guilt-free here. Okay, I wasn't an innocent Mother Teresa who just happened to walk in the room and, why are you blaming me? I did things that were wrong. I did things that I shouldn't have done. I'm ashamed of these things. They did too. They are doing them too. And I guess what I'm saying is we're never going to be able to rely on human beings in these areas to be completely self-regulating, as some of them are. And those people, we need to have stricter rules for everybody to control it. And they include the money link in terms of from the lobbyists. Look, I got to tell you, the people who are, if they thought about what I'm saying, the people who would probably be the least happy with it wouldn't necessarily be the current crop of lobbyists. They'd be the future crop of lobbyists. The folks who are on Capitol Hill right now, you can't become a lobbyist. You can't get your dinner paid for anymore. You can't go play golfing. You can't go to the Redskins. I don't know. Maybe going to the Redskins is not necessarily a punishment. I don't know. All these things are going to go away if one magical day all these things happen. So it would very much affect the congressman. Well, it's come out since a number of members of Congress have said he's come in to lobby them on the matter. I think what Newt is probably falling in this gap, and I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt here, he's probably falling in the gap of definition of what legally makes you have to register as a lobbyist versus what is lobbying. And I think it was Stephen Colbert said, I went out and bought an Alfa Romeo and I didn't register it. Does that mean it's not a car? Thank you.
You said a few minutes ago that you would like to see some people be taken out of the system as donors because of their motives. Is there a way to do that?
Well, I've discussed this with a lot of folks in enforcement, let's call it, because obviously first of all, I don't have legislative language. Everything's going to come down to definitions. I imagine there are ways to do it, but that doesn't mean people are going to find loopholes in the ways to do it. It's going to be an ongoing process. No matter what is done, it's an ongoing process. There's not going to probably be a day where we come up with a set of laws that make human beings perfectly well behaved. So knowing that, all I'm saying, and I think what all these groups say, is let's try to keep moving the ball down the field and make it better. And I think that in terms of that particular thing, there are probably in some cases very easy ways to figure it out in terms of who's getting benefits and who's lobbying for benefits, and then some are going to be more difficult. Well, I don't know, because the case in North Carolina that just went through the Fourth Circuit, and there is a history of if somebody makes a choice to do something, you can give up certain rights in this country by choice. So if you choose to be a lobbyist, nobody's forcing anyone to be a lobbyist. I wasn't forced. But so if you make a choice to do something, giving up certain other things is not necessarily inconsistent with the approach.
But on the first point, it's not so much to read into people's hearts or in their minds. It's sort of structurally where they are, if they're seeking benefits from
Exactly,
government.
actions, right.
Do you have plans, Mr. Abramoff, to be personally involved in trying to advance your agenda? Will you lobby on the legislation?
Well, I don't know how many congressmen will take a meeting with me to lobby with them. They'd have to be at the end of their career and wanting to play a practical joke on someone. But I don't know what my role will be. I want to be available and useful. If I can be useful, maybe I can't be useful. But if there's anything I possess that can be helpful, I want to make it available. I don't picture a day where I'll be walking from office to office on Capitol Hill meeting with congressmen. If I did, I'm sure most of you would be following me around with a camera, and they would be covering their face with a blanket.
Thank you. Would you say, by and large, you've been at the game for, 8 years now?
Yes.
Has it gotten any better, or is it worse?
I think there are things that have been improved. I think there's no question. But with every improvement, unfortunately, I know a lot of lobbyists. They don't publicly admit that they talk with me, but they do. And they're very clever at workarounds. And I think the systemic issues that need to be fixed have not been addressed. And I think a lot of it flows from the sense up there that's pervasive and that I certainly shared, that at core these things are not necessarily wrong and immoral. They just need to be tweaked and presented properly. I'm talking about the contributions as bribery.
Do you see any of the current presidential candidates sort of espousing those types of reforms?
Well, I've tried to avoid saying anything positive about any presidential candidate for fear that if I actually like them, that might kill their campaign. So I've kind of tried to stay away from that. Yeah.
Anything more from the...
You detailed some of the financial arrangements you have. You sold a lot of money to the firm. So how much of that, what percentage of your book sales, per se, are going to pay off that debt? What percentage of your salaries from your job is going to...
I have a court order ultimately to pay $44 million. It's tribes and others as well. It's a sliding scale of earnings, and it basically will be with me until I pay it or die.
Is it percentage?
I mean, it's like 5 or 6 levels of, it depends on certain months and things like that. What it is this. I'll give it to you in essence. They monitor every dollar I take in. They take basically whatever I don't need to have for basic living, and they monitor every expense I make, and my wife makes. Anything in my household, they control.
Anything else from the press? And as we do this, and also for the back, please identify yourself. Anything more with the media? Okay, let's go. Rich, you want to one more? We'll do the last one here, and then we'll go to everybody else in the room.
What are you doing for income? I mean, there's been talk of the reality show, there's the book. I mean, are you making income now, or
I'm still living. I haven't really made. Believe it or not, we've taken in only a few $1,000s on the book because the way the book, I didn't get an advance. So the way the book is structured, it's basically one of these typical publishing deals. Those who've written books will be nodding in a few moments. 6 months after the quarter in which they earned the money and after the accounting is done, blah, 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 they'll give us a report and then this money. But so there hasn't been anything from that. And I've been living off of loans from friends and basically some writing, some side writing and things like that. I'm working very hard on putting together businesses that aren't related to the political area. I'm probably working to go back into motion picture production. Those who fondly remember my last films will be very excited, if there is someone here who does. I'm working various and different possibilities. It's hard. It's hard for a felon in America to make money, to be honest with you. There are lots of things that felons can't go into. Anything that involves a bank loan, anything that involves a corporation, a public corporation. There are lots of things that are very difficult. So it is what it is, and I'm just doing my best to get by.
The guy with the glasses, Lee.
Thank you. Lee Griffin from the Sunlight Foundation. A few minutes ago, you said you'd like to do anything that would be helpful to the cause. Now, if you follow the last round of lobbying reforms, they happened because of you, in large part because of the scandal that was created. Now, as a student of politics, I noticed that reforms happen when scandals come out. So you talked about, say, 100 offices that were in your pocket. You say all these horrible things that you've witnessed. Would you be willing to share more of that, bring more of that to light to create public understanding of all the things that need to be changed?
Well, I think I did share in my book a lot of it, but you know, I was involved in 2,000 investigations with the government, and they went through virtually everybody who had anything to do with me with a pretty fine-tooth comb. Where they found illegality, they went after people, and people were indicted or people wound up playing to what they call criminal informations. Going beyond that, for me to accuse folks, other than in the telling of my story, I've tried to limit that. And the reason I've tried to limit it is this. Yes, you're right, there was some movement after my scandal to reform. But the movement was insufficient, and the reforms were insufficient. And my observation, which I've stated, including to the head of your group, is that those who focus on making these scandals personal, maybe they're more salacious and maybe they're more interesting news-wise, but at the end of the day, when the villain is vanquished, put in prison or done with whatever is done to them, people pat themselves on the back and go home. And systemic reform is not achieved. So as a consequence, I feel strongly that rather than focus on the perfidy of an individual or perhaps some of the skullduggery of the past, focus instead on what enables this, not just illegal behavior, but perfectly legal and perfectly corrupt behavior to exist, and let's go after it. And I don't believe, by the way, and I think that the recent vote last week on the Stock Act, while there were examples of individual members who were behaving in an untoward fashion, one of them, Nancy Pelosi, was able to get up and become a leader for getting it approved, and is a leader for getting it approved. So rather than hanging her, it seems that bringing the matter to light has actually helped to get her active. And so my own interest is in systemic reform. And finally, I have to tell you, and I understand that this is an interest of the Sunlight Foundation to sort of reveal where all the bodies are buried and who might have done this and that. Having gone through what I went through, watching my family be torn to shreds, and my children suffer immensely, I can't be the agent of doing that to someone else. I can't be the agent of causing someone to go to prison. I spoke honestly to the investigators because that was something I took upon myself to do, and I did. But going beyond that, I'm not going to necessarily be somebody who's going to be helpful. Because having been through what I've been through, even my worst enemy I wouldn't send in that path. So you'll have to forgive my not wanting to do that. But that's unfortunately where I stand.
Ellen, do you want to follow up, or are you okay?
Yeah, I think Ellen Lilly
Oh.
from my foundation.
Hi.
Jack and I discussed this issue before. I certainly agree with my colleague Lee's statement that reform doesn't happen without scandal, without naming names. Reform doesn't happen, which leads us to reform. So I don't know how you're going to be helpful. But today, once again, you mentioned something, you could be helpful if you said you offered jobs in your firm to a number of staff who didn't take those jobs. Who are those people?
I didn't say, as far as those, Ellen, I guess, again, the folks, some of them are gone. Most of them are gone, actually, the ones that I offered jobs that didn't take them. Some of them got involved in my scandal in other ways and wound up, one of them's actually in a prison or in a halfway house now. I know that that's the focus for you, and I know that in terms of bringing out those names, for the reasons I stated before, it's not going to be the focus for me. And by the way, I'm not certain I'm needed anyway. You guys are doing such a great job at getting some of these names out, including mine, that I don't know it's necessary. It's just a very hard thing to ask for me to do. I did do it as far as law enforcement went, and I'm trying to focus instead of my getting into that sort of swamp to try to, and then slugging it out with those folks, because I have to tell you, the few that I have spoken about, I spoke about Senator Grassley, and Senator Grassley, including to NPR at length. Only in the context, by the way, of explaining to them, as I did, what our efforts were on behalf of Tyco and that lobbying campaign. And the vociferous response from Senator Grassley's office, denying at every step everything that I described and frankly showed some emails about, proved to me again that all that my doing that would accomplish would be to create new altercations that for me wouldn't be beneficial in the sense of my trying to help. It would only merely put me into a pugilistic category with individuals who, of course, are going to respond that I'm a felon, I'm a criminal, I'm a liar, which is the normal response, by the way, too, when I say something. The American League of Lobbyists, for example, have their mantra of response to my criticisms of lobbying is I'm a felon, I'm a criminal, and I'm a liar. So the other thing, by the way, they came up with, which I found quite humorous, is they said, and he wasn't really even a lobbyist. Oh, great. Thank you. But, and they also said I would never be allowed to join their organization, which I also took as a badge of honor.
Knowing what you know, are you surprised there weren't more criminal prosecutions coming out of your case?
Knowing that they have a speech and debate clause, no. Unfortunately not.
That's good. Craig.
Sort of a follow-up on how you could be Craig Holman is public citizen. I think one of the most important things we could do to try to reform the profession of lobbying is to break that potentially corrupting nexus between lobbyists, money, and lawmakers, which is what you are advocating here. We tried getting a provision like that in the Honest Leadership and Open Government in 2007, and we could not get it in there, either with the Democrats or the Republicans. We got a disclosure, a bundling disclosure provision in, but that's as far as they would go. The American Bar Association set up a task force that came up with a recommendation to prohibit lobbyists from participating in fundraising altogether. Bundling, fundraising, soliciting funds, which sounds like what you're advocating here. However, already that provision is considered very controversial, and people are talking about slicing it off of the entire package as a standalone bill because they think it might not go anywhere. At this point, it only has Obama, the American Bar Association, and perhaps you endorsing this. How can we get it going further than that? I mean, how can we get some conservative organizations perhaps signing on with some idea like this so we can get this moving?
Well, first of all, the lack of conservative involvement in this space is very much something I am trying to focus on because I've been on over a couple hundred talk radio shows since my book came out, and most of talk radio world is conservative. And I've yet to encounter a host or a call-in guest or anyone who's opposed to these things that we're talking about. But because the conservative movement groups have not focused on this, and because there is no conservative counterpart yet to the good government groups, For some reason, conservatives kind of look at this space as not our business in Washington, but in the grassroots and among the Tea Party and folks like that, it is very much an issue for them. So I think that it's essential to add to the good work you've been doing that there is a Republican/conservative component to this. I'm hoping that there will be one very soon. I've certainly been doing my best to talk to them about that, and I think that there's general agreement it has to happen. It is not conservative to defend this system, this corruption. That is not a conservative value. And in fact, it's antithetical to conservative thinking. And so I think that hopefully it will happen. Once that does happen, my strong view is that we need to come to legislative language encompassing everything that the right and the left can agree upon, everything, not to leave things out because they're controversial. If they're controversial, it means that they're effective. If they're controversial, it means that the folks who don't want this don't want them. And that should be a sign that one needs to try to push them. Now, I think that the way forward on this, in my own view, is to, as I wrote about, to replicate my old buddy Grover Norquist's approach with the pledge. And I know there are 1,000 pledges out there now, but a pledge that's very specific, geared exactly to legislation, that members will vote for it within 30 days, co-sponsor it, vote it out of committee, vote it out of the Rules Committee, et cetera, but a series of pledges and then hold them to it. And frankly, probably needs a couple of election cycles where members who go back on this pledge are taken out by the right and by the left, and on both sides. I think that will probably change this debate considerably. Now, I'm talking as the old lobbyist that I was, and that was what I would do if it were one of my clients, if I were in an effort. Find a way to squeeze them, the members, into a position where they can't face their voters with a straight face and say that I'm not supporting these things which most Americans overwhelmingly support, but make it cost them something electorally.
All the way back.
My name is Lee Cutler. I'm director of a research group called Asia Policy Point. We study Northeast Asia. One of the, you have reported your work with the American Indians and the tribe, but could you comment a little bit on your work killing the American POWs of Japan legislation that you actually helped create?
Wait, say it again, the what?
American POWs of Japan back in 2000, you helped get hundreds of congressional co-sponsors for legislation to help the American POWs.
I did?
Japanese
I don't think I was ever involved in that issue. I'm sorry. I wish I was, but
there are news articles about
well, there might be news articles, but there were news articles that I caused Katrina, by the way. No, I wish I had helped POWs, but my firm might have. But understand something. At a law firm, at a big lobbying firm, there may be people working on something that I never heard about. So, I mean, I may have even heard about this, by the way, but I don't remember working on this. What is it now? It's POWs?
help the American POWs in Japan who were enslaved and tortured
Oh,
to get compensation
good.
from the Japanese companies.
That's great. No, I believe I would have helped with that. I just didn't, I don't remember that at all. I'm sorry.
Maybe we can talk later.
Sure, sure.
I'm Sally Greenberg. I'm with National Consumers League. One of the questions I would ask you, or I'd love to get your advice on, is consumer organizations, environmental organizations, probably what you guys thought is good guy organizations, don't have PACs. We don't have tickets to Super Bowls and other fancy sporting events. And we don't have, obviously, we don't have all the goodies that you were able to give away. And yet, we do win sometimes. And we win on some pretty big stuff. So I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are. I mean, what was the conversation back and forth when you guys pushed back on some of the issues that you were, some of the not so savory kinds of legislative matters that you offered as work with members of Congress on? Can you give us some advice on, this system we've painted is a very corrupt one, obviously. But sometimes the good guys do win.
Mhm.
So what's your perspective on that? How can
Well, what makes it difficult for a lobbyist is when an issue becomes, quote, too big to lobby on. All right, so whenever an issue gains the popular consensus and where it becomes overwhelmingly people are in favor of something, it becomes very difficult to lobby on an issue like that. Lobbyists don't work, for example, on the big macro issues of the time. For example, when I worked on, when I was head of President Reagan's grassroots lobby organization, we worked on the Amex missile. Okay. Now there might have been individual. I remember there were individual defense contractors working, but the issue became too big for them to have direct impact on it. So perhaps a lot of the issues where you are working at some point gain a kind of public momentum where the lobbyists aren't able to overcome that, and it becomes an impossibility. And don't forget, I mean, I say this with respect to a lot of friends who are still lobbyists, but most lobbyists are very lazy. Most lobbyists don't really want to spill their blood at the end of the day for their clients. And one of the reasons when we went up against most of our lobbyists, we were able to beat them is because our people who worked with me were willing to spill our blood, meaning we weren't willing to go home with a defeat. For better or for worse, by the way. It meant, unfortunately, also that we crossed the line. But most lobbyists are former folks who worked on the Hill, politicos, who are now making a lot of money, who got a couple kids in fine schools and go to the club, on the weekends and live the good life. And they're not willing to get in the trenches and go to war. Whereas most folks who are working in advocacy groups, believe in what they're doing and live it, eat it, drink it. They're day and night they're thinking about it. How do I win? Most lobbyists don't think like that. So just keep that in mind as well. Your opponents aren't always awake. They're sometimes drunk in bed.
Okay, that's fine.
Al Milliken, Media. Has your view on Native Americans changed? Also, their history of lobbying the U.S. government?
No, my view hasn't changed. I'm still very much in favor of tribal government rights and sovereignty. I don't believe that they should be taxed. I think that there are probably some things that have changed in terms of the unlimited capacity of Indian tribes to give money politically is probably not healthy. It wasn't healthy in my hands, I can tell you that much. And I imagine there are others out there who are doing similar, especially when some tribes, not enough, but some tribes have a lot of money through casinos. But I think generally, for the most part, the tribes still get the short end of the stick in this country, regardless of the couple dozen who have successful casino operations. And what was the second part of the question besides the tribe? Sorry.
Well, let me guess that the motivation for the question was something.
Actually, my own opinion is that historically, Native Americans have not been successful with lobbying. And I don't know
Yeah.
how much you've studied that.
I haven't studied it, but they were, I can tell you, I saw it, yeah. No, okay, that's complicated. That's complicated, but rather than get that's a lengthy discussion. But and I wrote in the book at length about that. But I think that part of the problem is the tribes rely too much on their lobbyists, and in some cases their lobbyists are out to win for them. And for the most part, I believe that was our record. We were, for the most part, undefeated. But sometimes the lobbyists and the lawyers who are with them are there to milk them. And I talk about an example in the book where there was something called the National Indian Gaming Commission, still exists, and as a burgeoning government bureaucracy wanted to expand its fee. They wanted a fee structure where the casino tribes were paying money. And so they started imposing a fee for what we felt was redundancy in terms of oversight. So we lobbied to get our client out of that, and successfully so. Well, we got our client out, and everyone defined like our client out as well. Well, that was changed in the sort of a midnight session by Congressman Kildee went in his former chief of staff then being the executive director of the, or chief of staff of the commission, and they changed it. So we went back to change it again, and we were going to redefine it and include a number of tribes with us. And we found that one of those tribes' lawyer didn't want them to be included in the exemption because they were representing them in a lawsuit, which they were milking them for fees, apparently. And so there are examples all over the place with the tribes. I don't think the tribes are really any different than any sector that comes here. You see a lot of corporations who come here and don't understand their lobbyists, don't understand this world, and are taken advantage of. And you see a lot of corporations who play in a very savvy way, and I think that's true for the tribes too.
Hi, John Claybrook, former president of the Citizen. Thank you so much for coming today. President Obama, when he came into office, said that he was not going to hire anybody who was a lobbyist. And that included any registered lobbyist. That was, to me, a very weird distinction because he ended up hiring people who'd been deeply involved in corporations to work on things that those corporations wanted, but they had not been a registered lobbyist. On the other hand, there are a number of public interest lobbyists who never made more than a salary, often meager salaries, who he would not hire because they had been quote a registered lobbyists, and they obeyed the rules, they played by the rules, and then they essentially were screwed because they had done that. I just wondering what your position is on that.
But I think it was horribly unfortunate, and I think that it can't be what anyone intended who wants to have good government, that somebody who's working for good government is, because they have to register by these rules, treated the same as somebody who's registering to go get some special interest, some benefit. And I think the distinctions have to be made. For me, I actually don't have necessarily trouble with an administration or Congress hiring lobbyists, as long as those lobbyists don't get some payday and some obvious bonus on the way in, and as long as they can't go back out. I think lobbyists do have expertise and knowledge and things like that. So if it can be done carefully, where a lobbyist is not going to be benefiting and may be recused from anything that has to do with their particular industry or something like that, that may be worthwhile. But what's troubling also is what's coming out of the administration in terms of people. I think that the Republic report, the report of the United Republic just came out with about Ms. Dunn, who came out and is lobbying like crazy and not registered as a lobbyist. So I think that my treatment in this, or my thought process is the people who are working for the general good and for the country and for their issues, whether I agree with them or not, should not be treated like somebody like I was, who was a lobbyist for specific interests to grab certain financial benefits or certain other perquisites of power that they wanted. So I think it's very unfortunate. Distinctions can be made. We are intelligent people. We can find a way to define things. That's what life is about, distinguishing between A and B. And I think that there's a way to do that, and it needs to be done.
We have time for a few more questions. This woman and then the gentleman back there. Okay.
Sorry. Just a follow-up to that, Obama has also said that he's not going to accept any money from lobbyists, and because of the way that lobbyists are defined pretty narrowly, do you think that that should be expanded, or so that if he says, I'm not accepting money from lobbyists, it encompasses a wider array of folks?
I think it absolutely should be a wider array. I think every definition of lobbyist needs to be wider. Otherwise, I guess Newt can give Obama a contribution after the primary is over, at the rate we're going.
If you want to go ahead without the mic, go ahead. You, sir, yes.
I'm Dan Webb, DC for Democracy. I wanted to ask you if you could describe how you were treated in prison. Did you have, for example, a cellmate? And, we hear these horrible stories about, my God, that's the last thing you ever want to enter is a prison. And for example, were you afraid to take a shower, for example?
Well, I lived, we didn't have cells. I was in a minimum security prison. But a minimum security prison, 90% of the folks are drug dealers. And so they come from the maximum and the medium security prisons. We lived 6 men to 150 square feet. Okay, our beds, our clothing, our possessions, our lockers. So we were pretty cramped. The prison was built for 2 men for 150 square feet, but because of overcrowding, we were pretty cramped in there. Camps are not, there's no such thing as a white-collar camp, or what do they call a country club. At least if this was a country club, it wouldn't have been one I would have joined willingly in the old days. Prison is horrible. It's horrible on lots of levels. It's horrible because you have no privacy. It's horrible because there is some fear. There is violence there. If you mind your own business, for the most part, you don't get mixed into the violence. When I got there for the first 18 months, the only ones who really mistreated me were the guards. Not every one of them, but the administration, I wrote about this in the book, but they had I guess their head psychiatrist, I was later told the other staff that in is coming an inmate who is the most manipulative person in the world. And that anything he asks you, you have to deny him. And don't become friends with him. Don't talk to him. Don't laugh with him. Don't smile with him. Don't do anything with him because he will take over your mind, in essence, like Hannibal Lecter, I guess, or Svengali or something. And so for the first 18 months, it was kind of rough a little bit for me. They threw me in the hole because of a miscommunication about our getting a Torah scroll. The hole is even worse than any prison you can imagine. The hole is basically a place where I think it was the Atlantic did an article, it might not have been the Atlantic, that said that after 72 hours you start to go insane. It's basically solitary confinement, only it's not solitary because of prison crowding. You're in there with somebody. And so anyway, for 18 months it was very rough and very horrible, and it didn't get much better, but they kind of realized I wasn't trying to manipulate them and take over the prison. There was this notion that I wanted to take over the prison because, that was the press stories I came in with. And so it was horrible. I lost my mother while I was in prison, and they didn't let me go to the funeral, whereas every other inmate got to go to their parents' funeral. There were other things, but having said that, it could have been a lot worse. I wasn't assaulted. I wasn't raped, which happens far too often. There was somebody raped there, fairly openly. I wasn't there in that place when it happened. There were people who die in there, and it was a minimum security prison. So you imagine how much worse it is in the other place. But having said all that, I wrote about this, and I do a weekly column, and I wrote about this, that in trying to explain to my children, who were quite forlorn the week that it became clear I had to go to prison. We have in our family every Friday night and every Saturday we sit as a family and have dinner or lunch. And the week that it was clear, my kids coming to the table were very sad, obviously, and it happened to be right around the time Katrina happened, and there happened to be a picture in the paper of some unfortunate father, I guess, clutching his daughter with a look of terror on his face as he sat inside the Superdome. And I said to my children, what's wrong? What's the matter? They said, well, what's the matter? You're going to prison, we're ruined, we're destroyed. I mean, what do you mean, what's the matter? I said, well, would you rather be this guy? I said, this guy is sitting, he's not in his house with his roof over his head. He's not got a nice meal in front of him, doesn't have his clothes. He doesn't even have his family. He doesn't know where they're at. I said, no matter what, it could always be worse. And I've tried to have that attitude through all of this, that even as bad as it's been, and it's been bad and horrible, that 90% of the world would trade with me at every moment. They would trade places, even into prison, than live the life that they have to live, in squalor and poverty and depredation and degradation. So I've tried to keep that in mind, and that helped me get through it, along with trying to have a sense of humor about it all. It's easier to laugh about it afterwards, but it's kind of funny as you look back, but it wasn't so funny as you go through.
Maybe 1 or 2 more questions. This woman right
Hi, I'm Mary Orndorff with the Birmingham News, and part of your book gets into a campaign that you and Michael Scanlon conducted in Alabama regarding some gambling legislation. I don't know if you know, there's a major public corruption trial starting as we speak down in Montgomery. Have you been contacted by anybody involved in that case, prosecution or defense? Your name has come up, which is why I'm asking about possible testimony in that case.
I don't think so. I don't. They may have contacted my attorneys. I don't know about it recently. You say it's just starting the trial?
Yeah, it's already started.
Okay, so they probably have compiled their witness lists already.
Your name is on the witness list.
It is?
Yeah.
Oh,
So I was wondering if
well, I guess I'm going to Alabama at some point. I didn't know that. Oh.
We'll take our last two questions.
Will Story, New York Times. You've admitted some wrongdoing. Do you think that you served an appropriate amount of time in prison? Do you think it should have been less or more? Did you get a just sentence?
That's a hard question. I don't know if it's one I can answer. I've been asked before. I see both sides of the issue, let's just say. It's hard for me to look at what's happened to a couple of my kids and my mother and everything and say, oh, okay, that's right. Yet on the other hand, it's hard for me to look from the other side. So it's hard. I don't know how to answer that question.
Rich, right here.
Yeah, I went back and reread a lot of the Senate investigations and all that before this, and my question is just why should we trust you or take anything you say seriously after all that you did and the people that were hurt and the very detailed sort of schemes that were mapped out in thousands of pages of reports? I mean, what is your case to the public why we should really care about these things you're saying, or that are in your book or in person?
Well, I'm not running for office. I'm not trying to become popular or try to get you to like me. Whether you like me or not, frankly, no offense, doesn't matter to me. Okay? All I'm doing is saying this is what I was involved in. This is what's going on there. This is the kind of thing that needs to be changed. As to whether or not I've changed, as to whether or not I'm trying to do what's right, it's going to be impossible for you to read what's in my heart. All you can do is see what I do. And what I'm trying to do is what's right. But as far as the other stuff goes, I did stuff in the past that was wrong. I'm not saying every part of that committee report was accurate, but I'm not here to fight and to go over the details. Others have done that. I'm here to say I did do wrong. I did get punished. The punishment was quite harsh. I've come out on the other side trying to make some recompense in every way I can, including in providing whatever knowledge I have in a way that could be useful for people to make changes. If they deem that what I'm saying is an exaggeration, that in fact what goes on in Capitol Hill has nothing to do with what I'm saying and that I've made all this up, okay, what can I say? But I'm hopeful people will realize that I'm speaking sincerely and honestly. And by the way, not in my own favor. I'm certainly not complimenting myself from the past. If anything, I'm accusing myself even more. And so if it can be useful and helpful, great. If it can't be, then all I can do is try.
All right, well, I want to thank you, Jack, for taking the time. I thank you all for coming. That's the end of the presentation.
Okay.